you know, we're all getting a little older because I didn't bring reading glasses up the last time we spoke. So, Paul, there's a difference between lying and choosing not to represent shenanigans as best practices. There is a difference. So, thank you so much, and happy birthday, Marines. This is my favorite place to be on November 10th, and I'm excited to share this day with you. So today what I want to do, well, first, warning, I am used to speaking in hour and 15-minute increments. So Paul, you are in charge of this, right? You need to give me the 10-minute and then the 5-minute warning. That's right, because I don't have a clock in front of me. So we want to make sure that you get on with the rest of the business for the day, because it won't surprise you that I could easily speak from now until we're frying eggs on the sidewalk about the CAP units, and we would all be in here for many, many days on end. So what I want to address is 3 different audiences who really need your stories. So first is America the hegemon, and I'll explain what I mean by that phrase in a minute. The second one is the modern United States Marine Corps. And the third is this new young generation of Americans who are going to be leaders in the next 10 years. And they are the young people who I work with every day at Utah State, and they need you. So let's start with America the hegemon. So as some of you know, my background is CIA. I also spent some time with the State Department, and I was on the Pentagon's Close Combat Lethality Task Force, which makes me sound a lot cooler and more lethal than I actually am, but served there as well. And now run a Center for Anticipatory Intelligence at Utah State. What that means is I spend a lot of time looking at our over-the-horizon threats, right? That's my day job. That is what I do all day. Everything from cyber to disinformation operations, but also bioengineering. The things China has in mind for enhancement of the human form and what that might look like in a military 10 years from now. So whole range of wild stuff. And in the spring, I'll be teaching a course on unconventional warfare. Now that may seem at first glance to be a bit of a throwback, right? We're in the age of cyber and digital surveillance and all kinds of things. So what lessons do we draw for the future from unconventional warfare? So I'd like to recommend just the first chapter, because the rest will put you to sleep, kind of like the first chapter of my book does the same thing, right? So I've told you to skip that chapter should you read it. That's very academic. All right, so this one, Crafting Strategy for Irregular Warfare. This, which is a PDF you can download from National Defense University, demonstrates in really sharp detail in its first chapter the ways in which irregular warfare practices are very likely to be woven into even great power conflict. And in fact, I'm not going to say it that way. Will certainly be woven into any great power conflict. If you look at the way Russia is behaving in Ukraine right now, all kinds of irregular warfare tactics are taking place. So from the very beginning in 2014, you remember hearing the phrase little green men, right? So inserting forces without uniforms to make mischief, using the Wagner Group all over the world to make mischief, including cyber attacks and disinformation operations and a whole range of other things that don't fall neatly under the rubric of conventional warfare. So as hegemon, and some people use that word pejoratively, it simply means the strongest power, right? So there are regional hegemons. The US remains the global hegemon. As hegemon, we end up stepping into or consulting on or sending weapons to or sharing expertise with all of the major conflicts around the world. And we have a problem. Our problem is that we have never profoundly valued irregular warfare skills. They have not been rewarded in our system the way conventional combat skills are rewarded. Now, I could give you a long talk about why that's the case. It makes no sense on the surface because we've done far more unconventional, irregular fighting across our national history than our two favorite sort of shiny examples of World War I and World War II. They, in fact, are the anomalies. They're the irregular parts. It's far more regular for us to fight messy, unconventional fights. But our own internal strategic culture has really strong conventional war preferences. And you can see this across the force today, not just in the Marine Corps, but certainly in Big Army. You can see it in the Air Force and in the Navy. That our shift is to the new acronym, if you haven't heard it, is GPC, right? Great Power Conflict. And most of the training is training that really focuses on conventional aspects of that potential future war. That has to be focused on. There's no question about it. But the lessons that you forged in one of the most successful irregular experiments this nation has ever conducted. And I know that some of you are right now thinking of a shenanigan or two, right? And thinking, yeah, but she doesn't know we did this in our CAP unit. I have read hundreds of interviews from CAP Marines. I have read everything any one of you have ever written and sent to me. I have gone back to the archives and listened to hours and hours of real-time tape and interviews from 1968, 1969. I have read everything written by detractors of the Vietnam War. And I come from an institution that ran the Phoenix program, brothers. I am not utterly naive about the CAP program or about what we did in Vietnam. And I am here to tell you that what you did has provided us our most useful blueprint for doing irregular action successfully. Our most successful blueprint. Now think of yourselves collectively. Don't think of yourself on your worst day. Don't think of yourself on your brand new day. Think about what you did collectively. You broke the mold for this nation. I have studied 100 years of United States counterinsurgency history, starting with the Philippine insurrection, going through Haiti, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. All of those wars I have studied. All of those transcripts I have read. And I am here to tell you, your contribution, the reason I am standing here with you on November 10th, is that your contribution holds the most promise for doing this right. So here is my plea to you. You must write your stories, and not just the shiny parts. You must write your stories, and if you will send them to me, they will be heard, they will be documented, they will be rehearsed. You can let me know which parts you would like to not see the light of day. That's fine too. I'm pretty good at that, right? I have TSSCI even as we speak, so I'm pretty good at that. So you can let me know which parts you don't want to see the light of day, but you think they're important to be understood. Because as the US steps into what are going to look like on the surface conventional conflicts, but become really messy really quickly, we have got to be better prepared for the irregular aspects of this fight. I think it won't be a surprise to anyone in this room that if we do end up duking it out with a Russia or a China or an Iran, it will be across the territory of some poor third party, right? It is unlikely to be in our homeland or in theirs. It is very likely to be a proxy conflict that then draws on many of the lessons that you forged. And I'm going to say it one more time, we need to be better prepared. One of the unfortunate aspects of our Marshall pattern is that anytime we remove ourselves from what felt like a very unsatisfying, irregular conflict, we tend to shut the door hard on it and completely switch our training mechanisms over to our preferred mode of fighting, which is conventional. Those lessons are not harvested, they are not adequately recorded, and they are not adequately learned from or implemented into training in our schoolhouses going forward. And that is precisely what has happened, even with Iraq and Afghanistan. So, write your stories. And I'm going to give you some really specific areas, if you're willing, to focus on. So I'd like to invite you at this point, I know that you're not in a position to sort of take notes, but you are welcome to pull out your cell phones and record anything that I have to say, because I want you to remember it, and then I want you to write your story and send it to me. All right, so I'll give you a minute to pull out those cell phones. That's the service to America, the hegemon. Now, what specifically are we talking about in the skill set of irregular fights? You might think, I don't see how helping to train PFs translates over to a cyber war, right? How is that at all in the same camp? But here are some characteristics to think about, how you honed them and then how you practice them. The first is the ultimate Marine Corps mantra, adapt and overcome, right? So if you were thinking about not only where you learned that skill set, but some specific instances where you had to put it in play, where there wasn't necessarily a clear script for action and you had to come up with one. Maybe you were under-resourced, maybe you were outgunned, maybe you were brand new in a village, didn't speak any Vietnamese, and somehow hadn't also been taught elephant chess, right? So you got nothing. Whatever the situation might be, how did you live that mantra, adapt and overcome? Because your small unit action is likely to be the very kind of small unit action we will have to require of Marines in the future. And although that skill set is emphasized, I think there are ways to draw from your experience to do it even better. The second one is junior leadership. This remains a priority for the Corps, pushing leadership and decision-making to the lowest possible level. I can't think of another program that exemplified a more sort of amazing light junior leadership, NCO leadership at very, very junior levels. I hope you sometimes sit back and reflect and honestly just marvel at how young you were making these decisions. How young you were making these decisions. So you won't have done it right on every day. But what was it that helped you exert junior leadership and have confidence in that leadership and move forward? What was going on? What worked? What didn't? What advice would you give to the Corps in training its next generation of NCOs and officers in handling that heavy weight of junior leadership? Another one is just raw grit. I remember Tim telling me a story about digging a lima bean. Now, lima beans aren't good on any day of the week anyway, but then when you put them in sea rats, right, I can't even imagine what those tasted like. And his had fallen in the mud, and he fished it out and is wiping the mud off to still eat it. That is grit. And I know that that may not seem like a profound story, but Marines love to hear stories about other Marines and love to hear those moments of just raw grit, where you made it through another day, where you made do with less, where you pushed through really difficult mental shattering that you had to get up the next morning and keep going, or a physical injury. That raw grit is necessary for the Corps. And I will tell you, the Corps is in pretty good hands. I was there in June, and we got to do the obstacle course, and I am loath to admit that I managed to jump off the last event and sprain my ankle, which has only just recovered, so that's been 5 months, so that tells you something about being a 51-year-old. But we watched them do the Quigley, And I watched those young Marine officers float like they had wings over that O course. It was something to see. And I got the chance to sit down and talk to them and listen to their ideas and their enthusiasm and see them in their impressive, squared away bearing. The Marine Corps is in good hands. You have left a wonderful legacy for them to follow, and they're eager to do it right. So help them. The next one I want to talk about is creative problem solving. This goes with the adapt and overcome, but there's a degree of creativity that only Marines possess because you have the smallest budget of the force. So there's a frugality, there's a once in a while borrowing from the Army that takes place. So there's all kinds of things, but as you probably know, some of your less shiny stories are often most endearing to these young Marines. And showing ways that you found workarounds, to include workarounds for your village, they would love to hear. Finally, something that is underrated consistently and has been from the very beginning in our fighting style as a nation. What has been underrated is a true situational awareness that includes the local culture and local realities. Now, I know not all of you did that. I know that. But many of you did. Many of you did to an extent that you developed a sixth sense that was in tune with villagers so that their smallest behaviors sent you messages about what was going on in your ville. That is invaluable. And it is difficult to achieve. There are no shortcuts to achieving that. So times when it served you well and the effort required to achieve it, young Marines today need to hear about both of those. Our nation is more risk averse than when they sent you. And so young Marines are less likely to be abandoned in a village with just 14 of them for extended periods of time. And they need to know, should the nation require that of them, how they develop that true sixth sense for whatever geographic location they find themselves. How do they learn to read people? How do they develop relationships that helps them see the landscape of what's going on without anyone having to utter a word? We will probably never be really proficient at languages. I have finally come to terms with that. Which means they're going to have to do this without understanding the local language, which is experience many of you had. How did you figure it out? How did you do it? Is it just presence? Is it patrolling? Is it eating on the local economy? What did you do to help develop that intelligence sixth sense that helped you know what was coming? They need to hear that from you. So we've talked a little bit about the Marine Corps. I want to let you know, it always surprises me that you are unaware of how powerful the impact of your legacy has been. So some of you know that Marines were trained very specifically from, and I'm just going to phrase it this way, an idea of CAP before they went back into Iraq in 2004. Now I say it that way because there was a lot of detail missing from the way these young Marines were trained. Think about your own CAP units, think about how many PFs you had, and you have this mandate to train them, and maybe it went well and maybe it really didn't. But when they tried to replicate the CAP in Iraq, often they were training hundreds of Iraqis and saying they were doing CAP. No, you are not. Because that relationship with the PFs, as you know, when it went well, it was because it was a relationship. That's when you listen to this other person, when you have a relationship. When you're trying to train hundreds, there's no time to develop that. In addition, in our modern Marine Corps, for really good reasons that I utterly understand, units are moved in and out wholesale, right? The whole unit moves in, the whole unit moves out. That is lethal to relationships. You operated differently than that. You operated in a way that is much higher risk to our forces. You operated on a rotation basis that mainly dealt with KIAs, or at least wounded. And so people were replaced in ones and twos most often. They could be absorbed into the unit, the relationships could continue, so you had a continuity of relationships that has never been replicated since the CAP. So they need to hear that. Like, there's not a shortcut to the types of relationships you developed. You can't just offer training. You can't just offer to build schools. You can't be there for 8 months and then everyone leave and a brand new group come in and you've done, right seat, left seat for 4 days, and somehow you can gift to the new unit the relationships that you have fostered. It doesn't work the way it worked with you. They need to hear that, because as they attempt to emulate what you have done, which has been an overt ambition, not just within the Marine Corps, but I also work with the Rangers, I work with the SEALs, who we can talk about another time. Maybe the most interesting audience to talk about cultural awareness and working with others. So I work with our special operating forces. They also are aware of you. They also want to learn from you. And it's very easy to sort of skim off the top of your successes and not fully understand how those successes were developed. That's why they need to hear your stories. So in this effort this year, in the spring, I will be meeting with now General Dale Alford. He was a colonel when he was in Iraq, and Bill Journey, both of whom studied the CAP blueprint and implemented it in Iraq. And their implementation, I know, Paul, do you want to grab that? Oh, poor thing, it's on the floor. Look, I just don't know, but I'm just going to silence it. Y'all feel good about that?
Press the top.
Okay.
Hold it down.
There we go.
Just throw it against the floor.
So both of them studied the CAP, and I want you to hear modern labels for things that are going to sound really familiar to you. So things they did in 2009 that dramatically shifted our effectiveness in Iraq. That started, you hear all kinds of descriptions of this, turning the tide, right? Or finally getting the Iraqis to work with us. There are all kinds of descriptions. But here's what these two, both Marines, did. Presence patrols. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Combat outposts, meaning we don't leave anymore. You don't just do a big sweep through a town and then leave. Instead, you set up slightly manned, right? Not very many Marines were posted to these combat outposts. They're in very dangerous environments, but they stay. They are present. And constant ongoing conversations with the villagers. Constant ongoing conversations with the leadership of the village. And then just doing it all again the next day. Just that we are here. We are not gonna go anywhere. We want to talk to you. And importantly, no one's coming to chat with them until they have proven they can establish security. So all of that trigger pulling is really important in order for this to work, because no one wants to hear your bright ideas if you're not helping make them safe. So as they implemented these basic principles, which sound so fundamental, so easy to sort of arrive there from even a brief review of the history of the Combined Action Platoon program, but difficult for us to implement because they run counter to our preferences. We, the American military, like to move in big units. We like to be in our vehicles. We like to use technology to solve our problems. and you have demonstrated there's a better way to do this when you're fighting an irregular fight. There's a far more effective way to do this when you're fighting an irregular fight. So they need to hear from you. I'm recording their stories this year so that those can be taught in Marine schoolhouses before they are lost, and their stories are infused with yours. Now finally, I want to talk about Gen Z. Many of you have grandkids who are Gen Z, and I know that it's easy and traditional for older generations to kind of look at the younger generations and shake their head, right? But I am here to tell you, these are remarkable young people, and you have a duty to them. Here's the failure of duty that we have thus far provided. Now I want you to really think about who they are. Most of the students I'm teaching right now were born after 9/11. They weren't even alive in this moment of sort of national coming together, right? And this rally that we had on 9/11. They missed that. They weren't conscious for it. So the only things they have seen performed by their nation have not lifted their hearts. They have seen a very messy wind down in Iraq. They have seen a heart-wrenching exit from Afghanistan that absolutely did not need to be handled as badly as it was. They have seen a level of toxicity in politics that we haven't seen in our lifetimes. And that's all they've got. They have adults around them who have nothing positive to say about the nation. They have high school teachers who have decided that the mature thing to do is to tell them all the wretched stuff that's happened in the national history and not necessarily counter that with other also true stories of really amazing moments delivered by the United States of America. So when you look at them and wonder why their attitudes are the way they are, it's because those are the only ingredients they've had to work with. And I will tell you, they are desperate to be proud of their nation. They are desperate to have adults in their lives behave like adults. They are desperate for civility. And if there's one word I could place on it, they are desperate for healing. They want to be proud of the role that their country plays on this planet. And their concerns, appropriately, are planetary, guys. They are thinking, they've heard since they were born that the planet is probably going to expire in their lifetime. They want their nation to behave in a way that establishes partnerships and draws other nations to it, and that works together in a sensible way. And what they're seeing is that we're not even doing a good job of that internally in the nation. So one of the things, so I tell them your stories all the time. I have the Life magazine that has Ron Shadell shining from its pages, and Gary. I have Sea Rats that you gave me. I have the Combined Action Platoon patch, hand cut out in leather, and I have your photos. And I bring those into my classroom, and I say to them, let me tell you how your nation can behave. Let me tell you a few stories. And I tell them about you. I tell them about Trust Israel in his most raggedy outfit, stepping in front of the US Army and leveling his M16 at them and telling them to get out of his village because they had been fairly abusive to some of the villagers upon entry to that village, and put his life at risk. And good job him, he looked just crazy enough to do it, so they turned around. I tell them about Tim and his companions who came to the rescue of a young Vietnamese girl who had been mistreated by South Vietnamese officers. I tell them those stories that allow them to see service members in a light that they hadn't previously thought of. They want to be bridge builders, and your stories are full of bridge building. Bridge building with each other, bridge building with the PFs when it worked, bridge building with the villages, and that is what they want to hear from you. They know, maybe better than we do, that unless we figure out how to rebuild bridges with each other internally in this nation, we are the most severe threat we face. Not China, not Russia, not Iran. Maybe some of you have heard this before. It bears repeating. Lincoln, as a very young guy, back in 1838, delivered a speech to the Young Men's Lyceum. How many of you have read it? Anyone? I'd like to share a portion of that speech with you and just sit in awe with me at how prescient his words were for 2022. So this is January 27th, 1830. All the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa combined, with all the treasure of the earth in their military chest, with a Bonaparte for a commander, could not by force take a drink from the Ohio, or make a track on the Blue Ridge, not in a trial of 1,000 years. At what point then is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. As you think about that, your grandkids are not going to benefit from you ranting about the other side. They hear enough of that. What they will be immensely proud of, what I would love to share with this generation of young people coming up through, are the moments when you chose to be bridge builders. Maybe it was home after you returned from your service and people weren't treating you well. Maybe you took the high road. Maybe it was while you were in Vietnam itself. Maybe it was later in your life. But what they need to hear is, what does that look like? Because it's very hard to believe in your nation when you don't have examples and models to look to for how we can behave ourselves. They need that from you. And I know you have it because I've read it and I've heard it. The spirit of what you did, I have said before, and I will say again, saved the soul of our nation in Vietnam. And it didn't mean that you needed to do it perfectly. It meant that you did it at all. And that's why I'm so grateful to you and honored to share the Marine Corps birthday with you today. Thank you.
We have a surprise for her.
Maybe.
It only costs $50. That the association, the board members, along with Tim Duffy, would like to make Jeannie an honor, an associate member to the CAP organization. And the plaque was made by Chet. It was Chet, eh? And we would like to present this plaque to her so she can be an associate member of the CAP Association in 2020.
That means enough to me that I'll have to wait to talk about it for later.
We have a surprise for her.
Maybe.
It only costs $50. That the association, the board members, along with Tim Duffy, would like to make Jeannie an honor, an associate member to the CAP organization. And the plaque was made by Chet. It was Chet, eh? And we would like to present this plaque to her so she can be an associate member of the CAP Association in 2020.
That means enough to me that I'll have to wait to talk about it for later.